my beloved, until you are extraordinary and precious and worthy and gifted and resilient and resourceful. It is to help erase the residue of negativity in which we have been bred so long that we have become comfortable with it.
There is nothing greater than having a Queen Mother with tremendous credibility and love for the people to come and speak to us and to get us started right. We're fortunate here in Philadelphia because Dr. Adelaide Sanford, who lives in New York and in Philadelphia, and hopefully we get her to live more and more in Philadelphia, is not only a person of great courage, she is a person of great accomplishment and great achievements for African people. Dr. Sanford's professional career, just to give you some background, has spanned the elementary school through college and graduate school levels, even to the top levels of education in New York State, being Vice Chancellor of the Board of Regents, the University of the State of New York. And she is the Vice Chancellor Emerita. I could say many things. She's been a classroom teacher. She's been a teacher of guidance, an assistant principal, and principal in the New York City school system. She taught education courses at Baruch College and at Fordham University. She was a visiting practitioner and teaching fellow at the Principal Center at Harvard Graduate School of Education. And she holds honorary doctorates were conferred on Regent Sanford by Mercy College, the Bank Street College of Education, Five Towns College, and most recently, St. John's University. She is a graduate of Brooklyn College, Wesley College, and Fordham University, where she was a Ford Foundation Fellow in Urban Education. On the occasion of the 125th anniversary of Wesley College in Massachusetts, the African Studies Department presented the first Distinguished Black Alumni Award to Adelaide Sanford in recognition of her lifetime accomplishments. During her 19 years as principal, Public School 21, the Crispus Attucks School in Brooklyn, she earned a reputation as an outstanding inner-city school principal, and that was an outstanding school where pupil achievement, teacher morale, and special programs for gifted and talented students brought citywide recognition. The Humanitarian Award from the Congressional Black Caucus, the Distinguished Alumna Award from Brooklyn College, the Ellen Lurie Award from the Community Service Society, and the Josephine Shaw Lowell Award for her work in empowering low-income communities are among the hundreds of awards and recognitions presented to her for her leadership in education. Dr. Adelaide Sanford, a spellbinding orator, was unanimously elected to a 7-year term as member at large of the Board of Regents of the State of New York in 1986. She was re-elected to a second 7-year term in 1993 and to a 5-year term in 2000. In March 2001, she was elected to the position of Vice Chancellor of the Board of Regents. During her tenure as a regent, she has served as chair of the Regents Committee on Low-Performing Schools, chair of the Committee on Higher Education, and chair of the Committee on the Professions. Vice Chancellor Sanford, a tireless fighter for the underserved and the underrepresented, is a leading national advocate for the education of students of African ancestry. She developed the concept of a Board of Education of people of African ancestry and was instrumental in its founding, development, and growth. And the program emanating from this initiative, the programs have received national recognition. And she was one of the leading influences, if not the leading influence, in the establishment of the John Henry Clark House in Harlem. She was also, I should say that as Vice Chancellor of the Board of Regents, normally you go from the Vice Presidency of the Board of Regents to the Chancellor of the Board of Regents. But because of her fight for black children, for children of African ancestry, for her outspokenness, for her conviction that education ought to be a human right, and that we ought to always honor our ancestors, they decided for the first time in the history of New York State, that you know what? We don't think a Vice Chancellor can go to Chancellor. This is why we love her, we appreciate her. She's honored in the hearts of African people who have seen and heard her everywhere in the world. And I am honored to tell you that for several years now, along with Dr. Joyce King, we have worked with her in the education of teachers in Rochester, New York. Just delighted to see her here. All right. All right.
My beloved ones, my precious, energetic, artistic, creative, worthy ones, I call you my beloved, not lightly, but with deep thought. For so long we have been subjected to negative adjectives to describe who we are. And Carter G. Woodson has told us that if you want to determine the behavior of a person, you have to just get them to think the way you want them to think. And if you can succeed in helping people to feel inferior, you won't have to make a back door for them, for they will make their own back door. So for generations and generations and generations, from Agassiz and Toynbee and Hegel, who said we are primitive and savage and uncivilized, and no culture, no history, no art, no music has come out of Africa, into the experience of chattel slavery in America, where we were not allowed to read or write or speak our language. And we come into the time in the 1700s when Rutherford Hayes, the president, held the Mohawk Conference to decide what would the future be of the people of African ancestry once they were free. And they decided what that education should be. Never let them connect to the continent of Africa. Never let them know their history and their language. And teach the teachers how not to teach the history. Now, my premise is that's exactly what public education is in America today. Then Albert Shanker came along. He was the head of the American Federation of Teachers, covered all of the United States in his capacity as the leader of teachers, worked very close with the Board of Regents. And he said in 1986, and it is in the book documenting his life and history, never let the African American child learn his or her history. Because if they do, they will relate to their ethnicity, and they will not become Americans. He didn't distinguish any other racial group to remain ignorant about who they were. And then we come along with government programs that label us in a pejorative way: disadvantaged, at risk, culturally deprived. Talked about failing children. Yes. And you had to accept that in order to get the sop of funds that came from the federal government. And those funds did not go to the children who had been deprived of the opportunity. It went to the same people who had created the problem. And that is true today. They used to talk about closing the achievement gap, which suggested that it was children who were not achieving. It was a gap between white and black pupil performance, which suggested that there were the same resources, the same opportunities, the same expectations for both groups of children, but it was only those who were in this gap, primarily African Americans and dark Hispanics, who had to achieve. It has never been an achievement gap. It's an access gap. It's an opportunity gap. It's a resource gap. It's an expectation gap. It is a gap in language and history and culture. But if you labeled it as an access gap, then those who provide the opportunity and access would be responsible. So you can't do that because the system protects itself. So it was called an achievement gap. And in order to get the funds that came, you had to use that label, closing the achievement gap. And it went across America from every major higher ed institution. The effort to close the achievement gap, never looking at why it existed in terms of housing, in terms of health, in terms of opportunity and access. So when I call you my beloved and tell you are extraordinary and precious and worthy and gifted and resilient and resourceful, it is to help erase the residue of negativity in which we have been bred so long that we have become comfortable with it. So wherever you go from this day forward, remember that an elder in the African tradition, not just a person who grew old, for I have grown old, but a person who accepts the responsibility to speak the truth, to empower, to label, to embrace. So you are my beloved. I know you before I met you. And I will know you after we leave. And always remember that this elder has told you that you are beloved, special. We are the parent people of the world. We are the givers. We are the resources. And so when I was assigned this topic, Afrocentricity as a human right, I was thrilled because we talk about civic rights. We talk about the right to vote and how we died and were humiliated and battered for the right to vote. The right for public transportation. The right for public accommodations. But no one has said, what about the human right to be the best of who you know you are? How about the right to know who you are? To speak your language, to know your culture, your history, your traditions, your strength, your power. How about that right? That's the human right. It is not given by governments. School systems clearly will not embrace it because they are protective of the myths and legends and lies that they have told about themselves. So they will resist letting you understand that you have a human right given by the Creator to approach an understanding of who you are through the prism of your culture, of your history, of your strength. And that's what an African person looks toward. You cannot find it in any Western European educational thought. You can only find it in the essence of what it means, Afrocentricity means. to find yourself as a person, as a human being, created a little lower than the angels and crowned with glory and beauty and creativity and masterfulness in your humanity. So what I have thought is if I could, from my experience, share what I feel are the manifestations of Afrocentricity. How do you know when you are practicing as a person imbued with an African consciousness? Where does it come from? What are the exercises that you go through to get to that point? Because sometimes, and we're fortunate to have experiences like this one today, where the scholars who have done the research and the deep thought and the analysis and the travel come to us and give us the gifts of what they have found so that we can use those gifts in what we do. They're giving us the tools to practice as people who are imbued with Afrocentricity. Now, if you Google me, and I have never put anything on the internet, and I don't claim responsibility for anything that's on there that other people have put on about me, but there's one piece, I don't know who put it on, I don't know what the source of it was, but it introduces me as an Afrocentric educator. What a compliment. I accept that with great humility. And the truth of the matter is, it frightens some people. It gives some people of African ancestry the idea, oh, you can't put that down. You can't accept that. You have to say that you are not an Afrocentric educator, because then how can you be a regent? You have to be an educator for all of the children. And they were worried about what would happen. You won't get funds for Clark House. You won't be able to get a job. It will affect your children. And I said, but that's a compliment. How could I deny that? And I thought that if all of us, in every walk of our life, would understand what it is in terms of the responsibility to practice Afrocentricity. How do you know? Well, may I just give you just a few examples? One of the things that we're not able to do because of the history in this country and in Europe is to protect our children. That's right. You can't protect them. The police are allowed to lie. Do you know that it's legal for the police to lie? Look at Central Park 5. They told those young men, all you have to do is say you were there, and you can go home. They knew that wasn't true, but the children didn't know that it wasn't true. So if you don't teach your children street law, if you don't teach them that in America it is legal for officials to lie, you have to tell them that. Now, my mother was a genius. When we were struggling with a disparity between what we knew about our history and what we were being taught in school, my mother said, you can't fight the teacher, but you got to pass this test. All you have to do is just say, the teacher said Christopher Columbus discovered America. That's the answer on the test. You don't have to say you believe it. You don't have to say he did. Just say the teacher said so. Now that got me through many a tight spot by putting the onus on the system, which enabled me to be able to repeat what they said and keep my own integrity. When we would go to Mississippi to visit my grandparents when they were alive, my grandmother taught us how to protect ourselves. So that she said, don't worry about a white person, seeing a white person and stepping off the sidewalk. She said, if you see a white cat or dog, anything white, she helped us to know how to survive in that climate. And we thought, gee, that's pretty severe. But because we were children, she was enabling us to understand that even that which you ordinarily would embrace, a kitten, a puppy, be careful, because you don't know what's in the heart of that person. When I became the principal of the Crispus Attucks School, I was confronted with many, many, many instances in which I had to be able to live in these two worlds. And all of these magnificent young people that are here, and Lisa Delpit says, if I could just greet you in your own language, it would establish a bond. It would say, I see you. Not what you're looking at, but I see you, I embrace you, I care about you. I want to touch you. I want to be an effective force in your life. But I can't do that. I can't greet you in the language. So I have to say, good morning. Or the common term that we use, Hotep, which brings me closer to being able to speak to you. But the truth of the matter is, what pains me most is I can't greet you in my own mother tongue, for I can never know what it was. And that language disparity is so great. Every person can speak in his own language or dialect, but I can't. So everything that I say becomes public. But our children are so brilliant. Every year they make up a language. And they have changed the English language considerably by their genius. Nobody says disrespect now. It's just plain dis. And they have changed bad to good. So don't be critical of them, because they are trying to have the ability to have a language. So if you have a language that's indigenous to you, keep that language. And I believe that every person who is the descendant of chattel slaves should have some facility in an African language in order to connect us with the rich meaning that cannot be translated. So when I became the principal at the Crispus Attucks School, it was fortuitous. I didn't plan to be a principal. I enjoyed working with the children, and we served a public housing project. The school was on a half-day session. The children went to school from 8 o'clock until 12, and then the next group of children came in. The teacher had a preparation period, and the children had a lunch period. How much instructional time was left? Very, very little. It is illegal for children not to have a full day of school. So here I was entrapped as a teacher there. We were not even permitted to put on the child's cumulative record card that they had only had a half day of school. So they went into the middle school and into the high school with ever having had a full day of instruction. It was a group of teachers who decided to work with the parents in the housing project to help them to become uncomfortable with the situation of having their children only in school a half day, with books and resources very scarce. Sometimes the manifestation of Afrocentricity, when you're working with damaged people, means that you have to discomfort them. You have to help to make them dissatisfied with their condition. And you can only do that for first establishing with them that you care about them. You can't start off by making them uncomfortable with their situation, but you embrace them. You invigorate them. You enhance them. And then you help them to understand you have the human right. Not something that comes from the Board of Education or the Board of Regents, but the human right to an education that's at least minimally a full day of school. So when the effort was made, and I understand it was minimal, at that time I was a teacher so I wasn't sure, to get some change in terms of the length of the day of school, the Board of Education came up with a program. It was not called open enrollment. It was not an effort to integrate. It was an effort to take children in overutilized schools and put them into underutilized buildings so that they could have a full day of schooling. The stipulation to send these children from the Crispus Attucks school, which was overutilized, to a school that was underutilized, the description of the child who could go, he had to have no problems with health, no problems with reading, no problems with it. He had to be a perfect child. And I wondered, are all of the children in this receiving school perfect? So we struggled against that. And because I shared a classroom with another teacher, I saw her change the records of some of the children who would have been eligible to go to an underutilized school because her son was there. And she did not want anyone from the public housing, a child, to go to a school where her child was. This is the war that you're fighting in a classroom that you share. So what do you do about that? What is the effort that is made? It can be minimal, it can be talking to the parents, but the effort that came into my consciousness was that we have to change the structure of what's happening. So one day there was an invitation given to me to speak at a training session. It was called an in-service course. And teachers got credit for it. And I was going to talk about reading out of a book published by the Board of Education, as it was called at that time, talking about teaching reading. And it emphasizes the fact that first children listen, and then they talk, and then they read, and then they write. That's the progression. First, children have to hear. That's the way the babies learn. They hear and they touch. And so I did this experience chart to show, now if you feel that the circus is a concept that every child must have, or if you think that the farm is sacred and every child doesn't have a concept about a farm, then why don't you create one in the room? Very simple to do. And you introduce the child to the concept of a circus or a farm or whatever else you want to. And let them hear stories about it and language with it and vocabulary. And then you move on to the phase of reading. You don't start off with reading, particularly if you're reading about something in which you have no interest. Well, at the end of the presentation, one of the teachers from a neighboring school who was there for the course stood up and she said, you know, Mrs. Sanford, you are an apologist. These children are not deprived, they are depraved. And she began to talk about how her people came to America, worked hard, sacrificed, and have done so well. Well, I had to respond to that. There was something in my African consciousness that would not allow me to accept this definition that she made. So I began to explain the difference in their coming and benefiting from what chattel slaves had created in America. How they came and had the right to vote, buy property, leave their money in a Swiss bank, collect reparations from Germany, change their names if they wanted to, have their features altered. My mother was a dress designer and she worked with Jewish women who had figure problems. Now my mother was like a psychiatrist to them. They would tell her things about their life, and they would say, you know, Hines, I've got to save up because my daughter has to have these 2 operations. She has to have her nose altered, and she has to have her clitoris cut. So you see, there were some things that I knew, and I began to talk about them. The changing of the name, the altering of the nose, and this very interesting operation that allowed a young girl to go through surgery with a cut that could be healed and closed so that she could be a virgin. Now, this was not of my making. I was just trying to describe the differences in the behaviors and the kinds of opportunities that they had that we did not have and that they benefited from. Well, I was called to the Board of Education because the teachers said that I had insulted them. Now, here was a woman who said our children were depraved and was making a living off of it. And so I was told that you have to apologize. You just must apologize. From the Board of Ed, from the teachers union, from all of the teachers in the school. And I said, well, I'll give you this concession. If you can prove one thing that I said that's not true, I'll apologize. And I give you all the time you need. Just disprove what I have said. Because I can bring witnesses to what I have said. And I cannot apologize. And if my tongue flapped out of my mouth, it would flap along saying the same thing. Well, I was told that I would never, ever, if I kept my license, I would never get beyond being a teacher. 10 years later, I was the principal of that school. Because when no apology came, the Board of Education demanded that the teachers who wanted to leave could leave. Now, there's a regulation about how many people could leave a school, but they granted a wholesale exodus for these people who had been insulted by Adelaide Sanford. But it was the parents who said, that's who we want. Somebody who will speak up for us, defend our children, tell us that we're valuable and that she cares about us. Now, in the meantime, I had been taking the principal's exam. They didn't know it, and I don't even know why. But I started going to the Board of Ed, looking at the exams, and deciding that I would study because I knew that the European teachers got time off to study for exams. And when I took the test, I was at the top. The parents didn't know that. They said, what do we have to do in order to get you to be principal? What kind of qualifications? And I was able to tell them, I have the qualifications. I had the qualifications, but they had the footwork. And they simply went to the superintendent and said, she will be the principal or we'll close the school. Just that simple. Now, how did they know to say that? Because we had been teaching them. We taught them how to read the budget, and we taught them Robert's Rules of Order. So there's no way that they would not be able to express themselves in a way that was acceptable. You can't save children without saving the parents of these children. So I became the principal of the Crispus Attucks School, and one of my first steps was to get a building. We had had an annex, we had had portable units, but we didn't have a school. So we went to the mayor, Wagner, and he said, we want a building. He said, oh, you can't have, the school is too new. The population trend in 20 years, that school won't be underutilized. So I said, in 20 years, though, what about these children for 20 years? And so he said, if you can get somebody to draw up the plans, I'll consider it. He had no idea that we were going to get somebody to draw up the plans. But we went and found some black architects. And we asked them, would you do this for us? They drew up plans, blueprints. We took it back to Wagner. We had confirmed in a letter to him that you have said if we can produce the plans, we'll get the building. And we had sent it, return receipt requested, so he could never say he didn't get it. We got the building. Yes. Now when they came to build the building, put the blueprints out, their hard hats, and they told us what they were going to do. Not one person of African ancestry strategized with the parents. We have to let this construction company know that we will not be responsible for vandalism at this site if there are no black workers. You cannot come into a community where there's that much unemployment, men without jobs, and bring in people to build this wing. You can't do that. We can't protect you. They closed their and walked out. Next time we met, we said, you know, we have difficulty with the fact that you don't have workmen in each category. And they said, well, we can't find any, and they have to be union. We searched the records of the construction company and found that they have the right to hire a certain number of people who are not in the union. So we met with them. We said, you can hire. We got them. We've got them for you. In every discipline, not just custodial, but in every discipline, all the way up to the highest point where Native Americans were used. 52% of the people that built the wing to the Crispus Attucks school were people of color, African and Native American. And as a result of that, there was a contract drawn up with the Department of Education that every contractor who worked on any building that was a public school or a housing development, they had to have a certain percentage of people of color that matched the community where the building was. Now, the unfortunate thing is, those kinds of laws are not like traffic laws where they catch you. You have to petition it. You have to say to the construction person, this is what the law says. So the effort was to help the construction company understand that we were going to tell other principals where buildings were going up. Well, that was unacceptable. They really sued us on that. We were not allowed to do that publicly. But what we were able to say at the end of the time that that building was built, and we did have security from men in the housing project, not one nail was stolen. Not one truck was damaged. And the person who was the head of the company said, in all my years of construction, I have never had a situation where there was not vandalism. Nothing, because it was our people and it was us. That's an instance of whatever happens in your life, in your work, in your relationships. You keep African people and their needs at the top of the list. And you strategize and analyze how to work so that they benefit from it. Now, I stayed in that school from 1956 until 1985. Out of that school have come 37 people who have become lawyers, doctors, teachers, consultants, librarians, judges, and have kept up with them. And in 2013, the person who retired was my former student. And the one who was entering the position, my former student. Yes. And when I retired in 1985, there were 5 licensed principals working at that school who had been prepared for the principal's exam. Oh, they say, Miss Sanford, I can't do it. My husband will be very unhappy if I don't have dinner. We said, we know how to cook dinner for your husband. That's not a problem. Or they would say, I have a very small child. You know, I can't study. I said, well, we'll come to your house the night that you have to babysit, and that's where we'll have the study group. And every complaint was met not with a contradiction, but with a solution. Every para, every aide went to school. We helped them with their term papers. We had a little quiet room in the back because, you see, the housing project doesn't have any doors on the rooms. So we didn't allow the teachers to say the children have to have a quiet place to study. It was impossible. And it was impossible for an adult. So we had a room in the back. And we put a typewriter in there and a telephone, and we helped them with their term papers, and they were able to move ahead. Everybody at Public School 21 went to school. The program that gave them 2 hours off to go to college, in many of the schools, they didn't want the paras to get those 2 hours because they couldn't hire a substitute. Every para got those 2 hours to go, with their term papers done, their husband's dinner prepared, their children babysat. So in the consciousness of what it means, the manifestation of Afrocentricity as a human right is to put the humanity of our people in front of everything else we do. And so when I retired, I went to Harvard. as a visiting practitioner. And I went to Harvard with a determination of becoming the director of that principal center and of finishing my doctorate. My husband and I had made a conscious decision that he would get his doctorate first. And in America, and what America has done to African American men, I understood the importance of his being able to be the head. And it wasn't competitive with me. So I helped him to get his doctorate while he worked 3 jobs and worked on 5 papers at the same time. And then it was determined that I would go on and do that. And then Al Van came and asked me if I would consider becoming a member of the Board of Regents. I said, no, I live here in Cambridge. I have some plans. My children are grown up. My husband is willing. I was living in Cambridge at that time. No, I just can't do it. This is a time for me. Wrong. Un-Afrocentric statement. There is no time for me. Yes. It's only about me. Yes. So he said, well, come to the Regents meeting. Kenneth Clark is leaving, and we're having a reception for him. So I left Cambridge, and I went to that meeting. And the great Kenneth Clark, a great scholar, a great researcher, a person who has contributed so much to the advancement of our people in terms of his understanding of what that advancement meant. Doll theory, very powerful. The department had prepared a statement for him. He didn't use it, put it aside, took out a paper from his pocket, and he said, I have been a failure as a regent. They call me the quiet giant, but the children are functioning at a lower level than when I came. He had been there 21 years. The staff is less integrated. The textbooks are less integrated. So I have been here for 21 years, but I have not been successful as a regent. And tears came to his eyes. I was so moved by this giant of a man standing in front of this very austere audience saying that he had been a failure. And the we of me, the African consciousness of me, said he was a higher ed person. He did all he could. But we lose our children before they get there. Because I have known pre-kindergarten, elementary, middle, and secondary school, maybe there's something that I could find, strategize, do, say, that would help our people. So I left Harvard, came back to New York, and I served on that board for 21 years. Now, the Board of Regents is not just a board for education. We license and regulate 52 professions. All libraries, all museums, all archival material, public television, public radio, education in the prisons. There's no part of the life of a person living in New York that is not touched by the regulations of the Board of Regents. You can't get a diploma, you can't graduate until you meet the standards of that state board. It is the most powerful board in the United States because it combines from pre-kindergarten through postdoctoral studies, management and control. It is a non-paying position. No staff, no driver, no telephone, no secretary. You lay out your own funds to get to a regents meeting. If you go anyplace else, you have to document that it's regents related in order to be reimbursed, and then you wait until they send you the check. So my husband and I had to talk about that because at that time, when I was at Harvard, I was able to earn money as a consultant all over New York State, in colleges, in museums, in libraries, in publishing companies. But I couldn't do that as a regent. I could not function in any capacity in the state of New York that was touched by the Board of Regents, which was all of those professions that I have mentioned. So my husband and I had a discussion. Do I need the doctorate more? What difference will it make for our people? Do we need more money? Is where we living satisfactory? Have we been able to save enough for our children to go on to higher ed? And out of it came the people. The voice, the needs, the humanity of African people. So for 21 years, I served on that board without salary or compensation of any kind. Now, in addition to that, it is important that you note that every other ethnic group supports the regent of their ethnicity. Hispanic butchers give the Hispanic regent $100,000 every year so that he or she could travel, write a paper, have a secretary. I don't need to tell you what the people of Jewish faith do for the Jewish regent. Every single group. Native American. We don't have any members of Native American groups on the Board of Regents. But here I was, with no money, no transportation, and decided to stay for 21 years. Not quietly. Dr. Clark said, you may not change them, but make sure they know that you're there. And I did that for those 21 years. Two of the things that we did that I think are most important to mention is the development of the document called the Curriculum of Inclusion. For the first time in the history of the state of New York, scholars of the ancestry of the people being examined were used to tell their story. In the past, European people describe what we're doing, our failures, our successes, what we need to do and accomplish. That had always been done. Diane Ravitch was one of the main writers. But I insisted that the four groups that were failing, Hispanics, Native Americans, second-generation Asians, and African Americans, have as the person to do the research come from their group. Now that may sound like an easy thing to do. It was extremely difficult because the European people felt that they are the ones who make the determination. But we were able to get that through, and I don't have time to tell you what the strategy was to get that through. Why did we look at curriculum? Because most of the time at the Board of Regents meetings, we talked about things that we had no control over, such as budget. We don't have a budget. You make all kinds of ideal statements about all children can learn, but you don't have a budget. You have to go to the budget office and ask for that money. Every program, whether it's SEEK, EHOP, HEHOP, College Discovery, all those programs didn't come from the Board of Regents. They came from the Black and Puerto Rican Conference in the legislature. They passed those laws and then gave it to the Board of Regents to implement. And then we go to the budget office to get the money. So while I was going through all of that, I said, well, since we don't control that, why don't we talk about what we can control? We are responsible for curriculum because all of the state tests were based on the state curriculum. You don't have to use the state curriculum, but the tests are based on it, and your curriculum must match those subject areas. So that's how we got to the issue of curriculum. And the question was, what role does the current curriculum play in the failure of these four groups of students who were failing? What is the role of curriculum? These four people never met together, but all of the curriculum materials from the state, from pre-kindergarten through secondary school, went to them, and they examined it with an eye to find out the role of curriculum in the failure of these four students, four groups. Dr. Leonard Jeffrey was the African American scholar. Can you imagine what it took to get the Board of Regents to accept that? Hispanics had a Hispanic one that they selected, African American, and so forth. Now they never met, but the document that they developed, thank you, indicated that the current curriculum of the state of New York was distorted, omissive, false, and contributed to the failure of these four groups of students. The curriculum, that was a result of the effort on my part as a member of the Board of Regents to get the other regents to accept that review. Now, once the report came out, there was so much pressure put on the commissioner that he had a group of people to review. One of the people was Diane Ravitch. Ed Gordon was one. There was a Hispanic and a Native American. They never said that it wasn't true. They never said the information was wrong. They said the language was harsh. But Diane Ravitch distributed a private memo saying that if this curriculum is changed, because in the review process, we talked about the fact of who owned the slave ships and who had the insurance and what went on in Curacao. And she was furious. She said, well, let's talk about how black people sold their sisters and brothers into slavery. I said, you know, Dr. Ravitch, I believe that Judaism is a religion. That's their religion. But when they were in Germany, weren't they Germans? When they were in Poland, weren't they Polish? Why don't you talk about how your people put your people by nationality into the Holocaust? Now, once again, that was not the right thing to say. It was true, and she couldn't answer. I said, why do you think that Africa as a country has to be the same all over? Do you expect German to be like French? Poles to be like Greeks? Africa is a continent. Now, I'm not even discussing whether it's true that they sold each other or not. I'm just asking, why don't you use that same phraseology in terms of the Jews who went to the gas chambers were Germans or Polish or whatever it was that they were by nationality? Well, that's when this memo went out. Fortunately, I was able to get a copy of it saying this cannot go through. It will be detrimental. It's anti-Semitic. Back to the gas chambers. So what did the Board of Regents do? They took the report and never voted on it. So we had to take the report to the public in order for the people to know what this said, in order to deal with the issue of curriculum. And that's when I first met Dr. King, around the issues of curriculum. And we're still there around the issues of curriculum. And in the notion of Afrocentricity as a human right in education, the only way we got the civil rights that we have is other people had the rights and we didn't. And so we had to fight, die, shed blood, study, have people in every category of thinking, from those that sat in the trenches to those who sat at the executive tables, to get the laws changed. Then we had to fight to get them enforced. Then we have to struggle now to see that they're not revoked. But we haven't done that in education. We have not declared Afrocentricity as a human right in education. And the only way we'll get it is to do the same thing we did with the other civil rights that we secured. And sometimes we're not able to do that because we don't understand what it means to be a human being in the Afrocentric context. The humanity, the culture, the history, the rituals, the celebrations, the activities. But most of all, what we don't understand is what it does to your own humanity. I wish I could tell you more about human rights, human humanization, to become a human being. We're robotic. We don't love enough. Now, while I had no funds and received no salary, I left more money at the Board of Regents than almost any other regent. I put up a fund of $10,000 from money from my husband to create a recognition award called the Hines Sanford Recognition Award. And it is to be given every year to some person, scholar, teacher, community-based organization, who brings information about the history and culture of people of African ancestry and presents it at the Board of Regents. That's why I put the money there, so they could come before the Board of Regents, because all of the other groups come and they tell their story and everybody cries. But me. But nobody ever told our story. So that $10,000 is there. And the first award went to a gentleman who single-handedly forced his congressman to establish a commission to find out if enslaved people helped build the Capitol, because he had read about it in the book The Debt. He got the first award because when the commission was formed, they found that Africans did help to build the Capitol, and they even knew the name of one who did the engraving. Now the issue is for the White House, because we know they built that too. He got the first award. And he came before the Board of Regents in his African royalty and told the story and spanked them for not teaching the truth. The second award will go to the person who is the head of the Attorney Bureau in Brooklyn, Charles Hines. Charles Hines gets to be the district attorney because of an issue with a black boy who was murdered in Howard Beach. But in his work with children, he found that African American students didn't know anything about their history. So he took these children, all who had been convicted, some of them of major crime, and instead of incarcerating them, put them through a course in black history. Had them learn the history, they traveled, they went to the Underground Railroad, they drew pictures, and they talked about how it changed their lives. He has been given no recognition. He developed a film, and the film talks about how the Supreme Court supported slavery in its decision. And as a result of that, it changed the lives of these children. He came to me and asked me to participate in the making of this video, which I did. And then I recommended that he get an award from the Board of Regents because he said it is the omission of the truth about the African American child in the school system that's responsible for who you see in the prison system. He will get that second award. Now they drag their feet and they change the date and they do everything they can to keep it from happening. But I'm pushing, and the person who replaced me as Regent at Large came out of my school. And I helped to see that he got there. Can't tell you about that either because there is not enough time. But these are the evidences of Afrocentricity as a human right in education. And it means that you put our people at the center of your universe. They are the subject, not the object. You define who they are. You define who you are and your relationship with them. It is very, very encouraging to me to see the young people here, to see the scholars here. And sometimes you can't say everything that you want to say in all audiences because people don't understand. In fact, when I was running for the Board of Regents, there was so much opposition in terms of the things that I had said and done that many of the European regents and members of the legislature, because you see you're elected by members of the legislature, they were concerned. I don't know how we can have her. And it was an African American who was a legislator, and he went to them and he consoled them. He said, look, it's true she did a good job in Bed-Stuy. It's true that the school got the award for the highest reading scores in any urban school in the state of New York in 1975. But she's a bougie woman. Her brother is a doctor, her sister is a teacher, her mother is a businesswoman. When she gets out of that climate, she will assume her bougie role. And so he bougied me in. They knew all those superficial things, but they didn't know my heart. And so when I say you can't say everything to everybody, because in the Board of Regents you're supposed to read what they give you when you visit these various sites. And we don't have any regents of African ancestry in any of the urban settings. They're all European. We are regents at large. So they would give me things to say. And of course I would accept it, but I wouldn't read what they gave me. So then they said, well, you will have to submit it to us because we have to have a record of what it is that you say. Well, I couldn't do that either. I said, if you want to take it down, you can, and let me see it afterwards. So there was always that issue. And so there were just some things that I couldn't say. But what I do want to say is that the residue of the African languages that our people learned when they were chattel slaves, they couldn't speak their language, and they weren't taught standard English. But they had a wonderful way of combining the verb systems. So when I tell you this, please understand it's not that I don't know the King's English, don't have too much respect for it either, but have mastered it because I must. But then when I really want to tell you how I feel, I have to say it in a way that it's energizing, that it's immediate, that it's transforming, that it's enveloping, that protects you, it puts a cocoon around you. And it says it in a way that means not just now, but in the past, at the present, and in the future. And I say that by saying, I be loving you.